top 10 list, not full-blown in-depth analysis of each of these movies, but as always, spoiler warning. Originally, I had planned on doing a separate video for my personal 10 worst superhero movies of the decade, but since I ended up breaking this one into 2 videos, and I'm anxious to get back to reviews, I thought I'd throw a rapid-fire list in here to open this video. So as a bonus, I'm going to count down the 10 movies I thought were the biggest wastes of time, totally unwatchable, or just bizarre in their conceptualization and execution, and I'll just include a very brief explanation for each choice. In all honesty, some of these haven't stuck with me beyond my initial feelings of irritation or impulse to take a cold shower, and I won't have a lot to say about them until I finally make myself grab a shovel and dig deep for an analysis. Mercifully for me, a couple of those reviews are already behind me. As with the best of list, I'm only including theatrically released movies, just to be consistent, although there are certainly more than one direct-to-video animated movie that does deserve a place on this list, most notably Batman Harley Quinn for its horribly forced sexual comedy and what I can only describe as Bruce Timm's dirty old man syndrome. I just don't understand why you'd bank on the nostalgia of Batman the Animated Series aesthetic and then make such a raunchy, sleazy, kind of mean-spirited mess. And that Harley voice. Yeesh. And also, the 2-part Death of Superman and Return of the Superman, the absolute antithesis to The Dark Knight Returns. Let's try to adapt the most popular comic book Superman story one more time and do it in 2 movies because the last attempt at it didn't have enough real estate to do that story right, and then leave out the best parts of that story, make all the characters stiff and lifeless, and somehow make a movie that's worse than Superman Doomsday. Making this list feels more arbitrary even than the best of list. It's hard to decide what criteria to base it on. My top 10 are the movies I thought told the best stories but also resonated with me the most. So these are the movies I thought told the worst stories or were executed most poorly and that I could not connect to because of that. Obviously, personal bias does and should play a part in these selections, and yet there are movies that I didn't care for, and even movies I passionately disliked, that I didn't put here because I just don't think they're bad enough to belong on this list, and I'm not excluding them in an effort to avoid being controversial. At least one movie here is definitely controversial, and already with commenters even in the previous video. I've made no secret that I don't like Thor Ragnarok. I just don't think that movie takes itself seriously enough considering the enormous tragedy Thor has to face in that movie. The comedy isn't well integrated with the drama, and a lot of the storytelling strikes me as sloppy, but I get why people like it, and it's far from the worst superhero movie even in the MCU. I've spent 8 years, the exact number of years Bruce Wayne hung up his Batsuit, trying to understand how some of the baffling lack of character motivation, story conveniences, and leaps in logic happened in The Dark Knight Rises. As I've written about at length, that movie drove me crazy, but I gave it a 2.5 on Superhero Rewind, and everything is relative. That movie is a breath of fresh air now when I go back and watch it after some of what came out of the DCEU. With as many superhero movies as came out last decade, there were plenty to choose from here, and as many movies I hated having to leave off as I had with the best of. So anyway, here they are, as brief as you've ever heard me. Number 10, Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. Some of you won't like that BVS is here at all. Others will wonder why it's not number 1. It's a fascinating failure with a really neat, stylized aesthetic and some great ideas that just aren't realized properly, in a movie that's just too self-important with some of its ridiculous dialogue and plot points for me to take seriously. I was torn on first viewing because I finally got to see some of Death of Superman realized on the big screen, but the more I've seen it, the more I realized I was taken in by imagery I've always wanted to see, basically just a music video, and not a truly compelling story that earns its self-seriousness. The structure of that story is bizarre. It can't decide if Batman is a murderer or not, it can't decide if Superman is close to becoming a fascist or not, and it ends with 2 guys on opposite sides of an argument suddenly being best friends for 5 seconds before one of them dies for no good reason. And it would almost fall in the so bad it's good category if so much of it weren't so drawn out and boring. And it made me feel like maybe I gave Man of Steel too much credit in that rewind. Yes, Justice League is bad, and I get why some people dislike it even more than BVS, because at least that was somebody's fully realized vision, not a Frankenstein monster. But as unevenly toned and silly and lame as Justice League is, it's not incoherent, and it ends up being more of a disposable Saturday morning cartoon episode than the total quagmire BVS is. Number 9, Thor: The Dark World. I think the only time I made it all the way through that movie without falling asleep is when I did the commentary with Eric on Marvel Mania. Loki's fun, and that's about it. Too much of the movie takes place in Asgard to still do so little with the lore and politics of Asgard. The stuff with Selvig is not funny at all, and Malekith, one of Thor's best villains in comics, is turned into one of the most generic and unmemorable bad guys in anything. It's yet another uninspired movie that doesn't know what to do with itself, that thinks it can sell more tickets if it puts the word dark in the title. When I think of Dark World, I think of nap time. Number 8, Dark Phoenix. I don't like Apocalypse either, but at least that wasn't a bad movie trying to remake a bad movie. It isn't unwatchable, but it stands out to me because out of all the X-Men material still left to adapt, with Mr. Sinister still on the table and even teased already, Simon Kinberg felt the need to open old wounds and try to fix a bad movie, after it's already been wiped away in a soft reboot. Everybody's forgot about it by now. And he just made the same movie again, but with slightly more connections to the comic material. Very slightly. I just don't understand the wisdom in doing this. If it was a totally different thing, and Fox let Kinberg do the space epic he kind of claimed he was making, maybe he could have convinced me doing Phoenix again was warranted. But instead, he just spent the whole movie trying to subvert my expectations from X-Men 3. Hey look, we went a different way this time. Yeah, I don't want to think about that movie anymore. I got better things to do. It's a massive waste of time. Made a lot worse because of Jennifer Lawrence's insufferable man I don't want to be here performance. My number 7 is the Hellboy remake. Like Dark Phoenix, is a bad remake of something that came before, but of a good movie, and masquerading as a totally different thing. I don't hate it as much as some people, but yeah, it's not good. It's weirdly paced, tries to pack in too much material so it feels really hard to follow, but it's also strangely too simple all at the same time, and it's hard to be more disappointed than I would be if I didn't like the previous franchise, which ended prematurely. There's a lot of cheap, poorly integrated CG, nobody's especially likable, and it's just not the super stylized pulp horror movie Neil Marshall seemed to be promising early on. Number 6, Fant Four Stick. I've done my bit with this movie, but we all know what a clobbered together mess that was. It's one of the most compromised movies ever made, totally missing a second act, with a good setup but no follow-through, and maybe the most cringe-inducing here's how they got their name scene I've ever seen at the end. I like the body horror idea, the casting is all pretty good, and there was clearly something here at one time, but Fox and Josh Trank couldn't get along, and that led to a baffling disaster. People want the Justice League Snyder cut released. I wish there was a Trank cut for this movie. Number 5, Green Lantern. Also already analyzed this one. It's the blueprint now for how to not do a paint-by-numbers superhero origin movie, and how not to do CG costumes, and what lessons not to take from other franchises. Green Lantern isn't Iron Man. Also, if you make a movie about creativity, all the constructs your Green Lantern makes should be, kind of creative, and not the most obvious generic stuff you can think of. This was the start of out-of-touch movies all through the 2010s that felt like they'd been in a drawer since the mid-2000s. I would have thought we'd have learned our lesson from that, but we keep making them. And no, Venom didn't quite make this list. It falls in kind of the same category, and that was a tough call leaving off. I was too entertained by that movie, despite its bizarre execution and how stuck in 2006 it was. Green Lantern is like that movie, but without all the wah-huh that makes it fun to watch. Number 4, Jonah Hex. I don't remember much about this movie, which is part of why it's here. I haven't reviewed it yet, and I've only seen it once, so it's not sticking with me. It was so formulaic, dull, and cheap-looking, a holdover from a lot of low-budget faux blockbusters of the previous decade. Like Constantine, it was cool to see a studio take a chance on a genre that wasn't usually adapted from comics, a movie that's only in the superhero genre by extension of surrounding DC material. But if Warner's was as trepidatious as they seem to be with this material, they should have just left well enough alone. It's got a star-studded cast, which only makes a bad movie more glaringly bad when it doesn't come together. Josh Brolin was a great choice, and he does his best, but this material is so lame, he just can't do much to elevate it. Luckily, he got a chance to redeem himself double time in 2018 with both Thanos and Cable. I do remember that Megan Fox gives one of the least convincing performances I've ever seen, constantly going in and out of a bad accent, and wait, what? Will Arnett, Michael Shannon, and Michael Fassbender are all in this movie? I don't remember that. Must have been before I knew who any of them were. Well, nice that they also went on to be in better comic book movies. A cool western with a dark fantasy bent would have been really welcome right then, but unfortunately, it watches like the producers of Legends of Tomorrow went back in time and made a Jonah Hex movie, so we get something that I'm not sure I'd rather watch over Wild Wild West or not. Number 3, KickAss 2. I hated this movie so much, I bleeped myself swearing like 50 times in the rewind. It can't decide how far after the first movie it takes place. The writing isn't nearly as good. It immediately throws the likable love interest from the first under the bus. It has a nauseating subplot with Hit Girl trying to be accepted in school with stereotypical Valley girls. It ruins what made Hit Girl subversive and endearing in the first place by even doing a teenage version, and it has the grossest vomit scene I've maybe ever seen. One of the only really good things about this movie is Jim Carrey, and he disowned it before it was even released. Not because it was bad, but because he second-guessed the violence. But still, that was maybe a bad omen. I wonder if he would have felt the same way had he been in the first one, which had all the heart and soul this one was missing, on top of the gratuitous violence. I'm excited that I've done the rewind, because I never have to see it again if I don't want to. And I don't want to. Number 2, Glass. This movie is so convoluted and all over the place, I quit working on the split rewind halfway through and still haven't gone back and finished it a year later. Nearly everything every character does is unbelievable and ridiculous. It's another self-serious movie that's unintentionally funny, and I can't begin to take it seriously. The timeline of the trilogy is completely jacked up for the sake of a totally preposterous twist involving the creation of the Horde and the train from Unbreakable. And the last of the 3 twists was so silly, I couldn't sit still in the theater, and I'm surprised nobody asked me to leave. What Mr. Glass is and represents is completely reinvented just so Shyamalan can say he has 3 superpowered characters in his trilogy about pseudo-real-world superheroes. It made me question McAvoy's performance, which I've never done in anything else. It might get to that so bad it's good place for some people, but I was so riveted by that reveal at the end of Split that it's in the same universe. I really wanted to take this seriously, and it watched like a sophomore in high school wrote it. Like more than other things Shyamalan has made. Like a sophomore in high school obsessed with M. Night Shyamalan, right after he saw X-Men. Number 1, Brightburn. What if Clark Kent became a serial killer instead of a superhero? That is a great premise for a horror movie. Unfortunately, this thing was more interested in contriving gruesome kills than telling a story, so it became another dime a dozen slasher movie, but even dumber and harder to care about than a lot of those. It was sold like a satire of Man of Steel. Like, what if that movie understood the dark implications inherent in it and went full tilt scary with its Superman? Oh, but wait, this Clark isn't raised wrong. In fact, these Kents are maybe better people than the ones in Man of Steel. His Kryptonian ship is just affecting his mind and turning him into a killer. Well, that's not interesting at all. But it also ended up being really mean-spirited for no good reason, which made the kills no fun at all. And it's in my number 1 spot because it was absolutely the hardest superhero movie to sit through for me of the decade. Yeah, it's a super-villain movie or anti-superhero movie, but it's riffing on Superman and is visually inspired by Man of Steel. And that means I'm gonna have to suffer through it again for a rewind down the road. It tries to retread some of Chronicle's material in the most base and thoughtless way possible, and for that, it deserves the number 1 spot. Well, that was fun. Who's for Chinese? Oh wait, there's more to come. Let's cleanse our palate now with more great superhero movies, or at least movies I think are great, spectacular even, amazing, web of. No, not web of. And in fact, there are no Spider-Man movies in my top 5. But number 5 does have Spider-Man in it. It's Captain America Civil War. It was tough to decide which megacast event Marvel movie to put on the list since I resolved to only include one. I love the original Avengers film for expertly getting all these characters from individual movies on screen together in a fun and interesting way. And I love the spectacle, grand scope, and incredible balancing act of Infinity War. But my issues with Thanos' characterization in that movie bring it down a bit under Civil War for me. And Endgame is just too careless and sloppy with its storytelling, as much as I love it despite that. Civil War is that perfect blend of spectacle and poignant storytelling, and a wonderful culmination of a lot of story threads and thematic notions that had come before, particularly in the first Avengers and Winter Soldier, as well as the Iron Man movies. Primarily, the balance between protection and freedom. We get the novelty of getting to see a bunch of classic superheroes fighting each other in the playful Stan Lee tradition, rather than the brooding Frank Miller approach, which might have worked in BVS had the story been more thoughtful and about an understandable ideological difference between the characters on opposite sides, like the Russos do here. It is unfortunate for BVS that this came out the same year. Civil War is the whole superhero event package. It made me feel like I did watching the Avengers again, which I didn't think was possible. It felt like something that should have been impossible to replicate from the page. Not the storyline. The comics event is pretty bad, and has to make Tony Stark act wildly out of character to go up against Steve Rogers' opposing viewpoint about superhero registration. But just about getting all these heroes on screen together, giving them all good character moments, and making them feel relevant. Civil War focuses primarily on the mouthpieces for each perspective of the dilemma. Captain America doesn't want to be beholden to the government, which he learned over a couple movies may not always have people's best interests at heart, and thinks heroes should be allowed to do the right thing and only have to answer to the government when they break the law. Iron Man takes the preventative stance, the Nick Fury stance, that heroes need to be held in check so someone without oversight doesn't make the kind of mistake he did with Ultron. Their positions come naturally from what they've always stood for, and they naturally arrive there based on decisions they've made and events that have happened in previous films. It feels like the logical next step in the story, and regardless of which side I might more stand with, I understand both positions and feel like I'm invited to make up my own mind. I have reservations about how far Iron Man goes in his rage over Winter Soldier, who wasn't responsible for his actions in killing his parents, but I buy the fight between Steve and Tony after that at the end, and love that the climax to this huge epic about a superhero war is just a brawl between these two guys, and neither wins at the end. It not only juggles every previously established character insanely well, but it effortlessly introduces Black Panther into the mix, who is instantly endearing and captivating. And while Spider-Man is a little shoehorned in, and I question Tony recruiting a minor while making a legal case for registering superheroes with the government, Tom Holland integrates with the cast perfectly right away, and the character is handled with such reverence, it's clear that this Peter Parker has his traditional values, without getting any discussion at all about his backstory, just hints at it. The death of his uncle, presumably, which we proceed to never talk about in any movie that includes him thereafter. I think Civil War is my favorite Avengers movie, despite not having Avengers in the title. It absolutely should. It's no more Captain America's movie than it is Iron Man's. It's a great, light-hearted ride, but it also deftly explores relevant social and political issues, and it's the first time the MCU really feels like a living and breathing comic book world to me, where superheroes are the status quo. Number 4, Black Panther. I honestly think Black Panther might be the most rewatchable superhero movie of the decade, if not the best story or most exciting spectacle. I don't go back to a lot of movies frequently anymore, just for the heck of it, but Black Panther I put on 3 or 4 times since the theater just to immerse myself in that totally unique atmosphere again. It's such a sleek and stylish movie. Lion King meets James Bond. It gives me all that interesting cultural lore I missed from the Thor movies. What is this ancient civilization all about? How do their morality and social priorities compare to our own? There's so much interesting political intrigue, with characters in the royal hierarchy representing various arguments in the debate about isolationism, and they all feel like fully formed characters at the same time. I love the movie's stance on technology, with Wakanda's beautiful balance of tradition and innovation, and its optimistic message which challenges the typical over-reliance on technology warning of so much science fiction, and especially today. You have to be careful who you share your technology with. The message is not irresponsible about it, but how can you continue to grow and improve if you never allow yourself to be influenced by the outside world? And don't you have a duty to use your innovation to make the world a better place? Wakanda and Themyscira actually have a lot in common before Wakanda joins the world stage. Shuri's line about something working doesn't mean it can't be improved resonated with me, and I love that metaphor, how the ever-evolving Black Panther suit represents what the Wakandan culture should be. I also think it's interesting that after Bucky was transformed into a perversion of humanity through technology, Wakanda, the most advanced civilization on Earth that has managed not to be corrupted by its advancements, is where he should end up at the end of Civil War. Black Panther, like Civil War before it, is a great spectacle with some thrilling action, particularly the car chase after the blatant Bondian casino scene. I understand people's disappointment with the hand-to-hand combat choreography in the climax, but I think that scene is wonderful, and it's well blended with a poignant and timely story about a villain in Killmonger who has an understandable beef with the world at large, racial intolerance, but his solution is not to somehow try to create equality, but for Wakanda to rise up and become the oppressors. He's a great foil for T'Challa, who is one of the most principled superheroes and best role models to wear a costume since Christopher Reeve, and who is a real leader, not about his own agenda, and not about using his power to force his will on other nations, but also not the isolationist his father was, clinging to the preservation of tradition at the expense of the greater good. Like Wonder Woman, with its feminist message, Black Panther is refreshingly mature about how it handles racial issues, saying that the answer isn't vengeance, but real equality, and Black Panther is meant to inspire everybody, no matter who you are or what you look like. Another hero who has to take a hard look at his convictions, who is challenged every step of the way, physically and emotionally, but who ultimately is allowed to really be a hero. This is another movie I felt like I must have been incomplete without before its release. Number 3, Logan. Well, it took nearly 20 years, but we finally got a totally satisfying Wolverine movie, and it took a second attempt from the same director of the last one to get us there. The Wolverine is solid, but the inner animal and tragic nature of Logan still weren't quite brought to the forefront, and this movie is all about that. Logan is one of those rare, transcendent superhero movies, like The Dark Knight and like Winter Soldier, that's such an excellent example of the other genre it's playing in. It kind of doesn't matter that it's a superhero thing, unless you're already a fan of that character. Logan is a western, but with a sci-fi twist, lovingly borrowing from and homaging great old films like Shane and 3:10 to Yuma, but repackaging it to create something remarkably original. Few movies have impacted me in the theater the way this one did. I was completely rattled to the point where I didn't sleep well that night. I wasn't disturbed exactly, and I wasn't depressed, I was just profoundly melancholy. It's one of the great bittersweet endings. Logan, this man who might live forever, dies never having a family or really living a life of his own that wasn't spent running from people trying to kill him or use him, and where he wasn't in constant fear of his presence hurting the people he cares about. But for a few precious moments, he's a father, and he gets to set the heroic example for his daughter. Laura is poetically engineered to be what he was made into with the Weapon X program, but from birth. Without him, she may have been nothing but a killing machine, exactly what she was designed for. It's bleak, it's violent, it's relentlessly broody, but that's balanced with a subtle wit and levity. From Logan having to take care of essentially his ailing and dying father in Professor X, and his becoming the father to a child he wasn't expecting, with no clue as to how to do that job. Daphne Keane turns in one of the most intense and captivating child performances I've ever seen, and I think it's some of Patrick Stewart's best work too. He's as tragic as Wolverine here, the mentor who once taught mutants how to use their powers, who now has no control over his own, and who has accidentally destroyed everything he's worked for, and yet, like Captain America, somehow finds it in himself not to lose hope. The movie is filled with breathtaking cinematography, brilliantly suspenseful scenes of terror, and Mangold has absolute command of his narrative, knowing exactly when to slow things down, speed them up, and make a stop. And wait some more, before the other shoe finally drops. After X-Men Origins, I never could have imagined one of the great character pieces in superhero cinema would be a Wolverine movie, and I would give anything for Roger Ebert to have seen it, who said after seeing Origins, he wouldn't even walk across the street to shake Wolverine's hand. I think the movie is even better in black and white, and though it would have risked looking pretentious, I kinda wish it had been released that way. The noir version on video is the only way I watch it. My number 2, nobody surprised, X-Men Days of Future Past. There are a few movies, not just superhero movies, but movies that have resonated with me as much as this one. Not only is it the sort of ultra-creative crossover I didn't think we'd ever see from a big studio at the time. Mixing the original X-Men cast with the prequel cast sounded like a thing only a fanfic would attempt, or maybe a comic book. But it's not just a bunch of mindless fan service. It's a real character-driven story about a man who's lost his self-confidence and his faith in his principles, and it uses Xavier's reclaiming of his own powers as a metaphor for overcoming insecurity and learning to get out of your own way. There's certainly an undeniable novelty for the passing the torch element of this movie, saying goodbye to the old cast as we ostensibly soft reboot and reset the timeline from 1973 onward. It does that rebooting out of original continuity thing better than Star Trek 09, but it also does that one generation handing off the baton thing a zillion times better than in Star Trek Generations, with that awkward Kirk in the Nexus conceit. But what really makes it shine is the unapologetically optimistic story that's impressively not horribly sappy about it, about a broken man who sees an apocalyptic future, sees that despite everything he's done seeming to be all for naught, he still won't lose hope in his own future. I love Wolverine's reversed role as the pupil who has to remind his mentor of everything he's been taught by him, which is brilliantly carried through to its furthest extent in Logan. McAvoy and Stewart on screen together is one of the most powerful moments I've experienced in a movie, and I love Mystique's arc. It's not about fate, it's about choices we make, and she's given the power to make the future a better one, if only she can look past her own resentment. But it's not just about the heavy emotional stuff either. Days of Future Past takes a lot of creative risks and goes for broke. It's relentlessly entertaining. Amidst all the introspection and soul-searching, you've also got Quicksilver slowing down time and a technically impressive marvel of an action scene. You've got the best laugh-out-loud Wolverine one-liner of them all when he asks Magneto after his tantrum on the plane if he's gonna pick all that up, and there's all that clever alternate history stuff I love from First Class dialed up to 11, with mutants fighting in Vietnam to Magneto trying to save the mutant President JFK. And I still don't understand how his trying to move the bullet with his mind led to the president getting shot anyway, but whatever. The time travel device isn't well thought out, and it's got its own issues with contradicting continuity from previous movies, but it's such an elegant piece despite all of that. It's gripping and moving and hilarious all at the same time. I love First Class too. I think that We're the Same exchange between Magneto and Xavier in the third act is one of the best scenes in superhero cinema. But Days of Future Past spoke to me more on a personal level, and for my money, it does for X-Men on the whole what Logan did for Wolverine. It's the most pure, classic representation of the X-Men we've had on screen to date. And yes, bringing back John Ottman's X2 score and hearing it orchestrated in such an epic way probably has something to do with why it's as high on my list. And number 1, everybody say it with me, Captain America: The Winter Soldier. For me, Winter Soldier is the Dark Knight of the 2010s. It's a gripping espionage thriller in the same way that movie was a gripping crime drama, and it, too, intelligently deals with topical, real-world issues inside of a heightened escapist world. I love Winter Soldier's somber, mysterious atmosphere and the way it earns its seriousness. It's not self-important like Snyder's DC movies, it just manages to be important, and it mitigates that heavy tone with a sober humor that makes it feel all the more real. Winter Soldier is about personal identity, how individuality is what we're really fighting to preserve when we fight for freedom, how difficult it is to hold on to that individuality, and how devastating it is to lose it. Steve Rogers is, as I've said before, the ultimate protagonist who refuses to change, holding on to what he believes in despite it making him a fugitive. Black Widow changes her identity to be whatever she needs it to be in the moment as a survival mechanism. And Bucky has had his identity stripped away from him and used as a weapon to eliminate freedom in the name of protection. It's poignant, and it made me think more deeply about these issues than I had before. The Hydra reveal is one of the great shocks in movie history. It's incredible that it wasn't the plan from the beginning, and yet added retroactively makes perfect sense, and explains so much about the cynical and paranoid nature of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Nick Fury. It's like the Ares reveal in Wonder Woman. It's not a cheat to explain the evils of man in a cartoony way. It could have been that. It could have avoided taking responsibility for real problems we as a society have caused, but rather it's a representation of corruption and how easy it is to convince people to give up their own liberties and do terrible things because they're scared. It, even more than Wonder Woman, does an amazing balancing act of visceral, realistic thriller. There's not much more suspenseful than that assault on Nick Fury in his car, and unabashed comic book pseudoscience, particularly with the preserved computerized mind of Arnim Zola. Steve and Bucky have a classic tragic friendship, and I feel so much for Steve and what he's lost, but the movie never loses its optimism, not just in Steve's stubborn refusal to give in to modern cynicism, but in Falcon, who comes to the same values and realistic but positive view of the world independently from Captain America. There are still good people in the world who won't accept Hydra's philosophy of freedom as what spells our doom. And there it is. The 10 movies I thought told the best stories, created the best characters, and also most resonated with me through the 2010s, as well as my rock bottom 10. I know the last 5 best were predictable, partly because I've already done gushing rewinds on 2 of them. One commenter, Jacob May, nailed all 5 of my clues last video, and even though he said he didn't write them in any particular order in his comment, he unintentionally almost got that spot on too, just flipping 4 and 5. Way to go, dude! I thought it would be fun to see how some of our audience's picks compared to mine, so I asked our patrons to respond with their absolute favorite and least favorite movie of the decade. Here are the results. Patreon's top 4 best and worst, only 4 movies got multiple votes in each category, and some interesting outliers as well. We'll see if I'm way off the beaten path or if a lot of us are on the same page. So for best superhero movies of the decade, the patrons said number 4, Winter Soldier, number 3, Wonder Woman, number 2, Avengers, which didn't even make my list, and number 1, Logan, by a wide margin. There were several single vote responses. One person said Guardians of the Galaxy, one said Spider-Man Homecoming, Iron Man 3, and one vote for The Dark Knight Rises. And in the worst category, number 4 was a tie between Thor Ragnarok and Hellboy. 3, Suicide Squad, which may have been a contender, but I don't think is nearly as bad as BVS. Number 2, Fant4stick, and number 1, BVS, again by a pretty wide margin. Lots of single vote responses here too, and even one of them a movie that I put on my best of list, Justice League, Green Lantern, Batman Harley Quinn, which again would have made my list had I been counting animated direct-to-video movies, Guardians of the Galaxy, and Avengers Endgame. I am super curious to see how the next decade shapes up for superhero movies. Will the public's fervor for these kinds of films stay palpable all the way until 2030? Will that dreaded superhero fatigue finally start to adversely affect box office numbers across the board? Will we see the kind of massive evolution of the genre this decade that we saw in the 2010s? Or will it level off and just remain a safe bet, with a lot of movies, but not a lot breaking new ground? Where will X-Men and the Fantastic Four be by 2030, now that Disney owns Fox and plans to integrate those properties into the MCU? How successful and significant will the Disney Plus series like Falcon and the Winter Soldier and WandaVision be to the films and the MCU on the whole? Will we have a cohesive, well-oiled machine of a DC universe by then? Or will Warner's continue to succeed with standalone movies and franchises that are sometimes loosely linked but not deeply interconnected like the Marvel movies? Will the Disney-Sony Spider-Man contract hold? It almost fell apart last year. Or will we have a whole Spider-Man shared universe apart from the MCU, but actually including Spider-Man at that point? What will the impact ultimately be of Spider-Verse? And what reboots of superhero properties besides the former Fox-owned Marvel properties might we see? One thing I can be relatively sure of, superhero movies have had such a profound impact on the culture since 2008. Even if the genre isn't what it is now in 10 years, there will still be more than a couple of movies a year to add to the rewind queue, I'm sure. I have an enormous job ahead of me, with dozens and dozens of movies, present and way in the past still, left to review. Next time I'm going to take a break from the superhero, but not from the comic book inspired, and review John Wick for Rewind United. And then we'll get right back to Superhero Rewind with Justice League Crisis on Two Earths. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more. Bye.